All right. Well, because we're trying to keep everybody from having to dip in the same bowls and stuff. But we'll do hamburgers, hot dogs, chips. We'll do some good stuff, and we'll just enjoy that time together. And so, Homecoming Sunday, July the 25th. Also, the backpack ministry for school supplies. And I've got some of these right here. I'm going to give these, if y'all pass these to him. This, and I need to ask Missy about this. I'm not, I think this may be through the Caring Place, but they're doing the back to school campaign, and we have this guide right here. If you would like to do a backpack for the school children, it tells you the things you have, and you can see this. We have these online, and I think Judy will be putting these in the bulletin and probably on our website as well. And so, just tells you some things. We pack a backpack with some school supplies to get some kids started, underprivileged kids started for the school year, which will be on us before we know it. It's just going to be here in another few weeks. And so if you have a chance to do that, or if you have any questions, you can just get in touch with us here, and we'll be glad to let you know what we can do on that. Also, we take up supplies for Oakway Outreach during the summer, extra Gatorade, water, snack cakes, Little Debbie's, whatnot. Those kind of things. If you can pick a few of those up and just bring them in, you can bring them here to the church, and we will get those to Ocoee Outreach and to where it goes. And I think, the youth are going to Topgolf on the 27th, I think, is what Wendy said. They had changed it to. It was going to be this week. It actually was going to be yesterday, but they're going to Topgolf, and they will enjoy that. It's going to be $7 if you would like to go on that. If you have any questions, you can get in touch with Matt Doty or the church office, and we'll fill you in on that. Or Matt Hoffman, I think Matt knows about it as well. And you can get in touch with one of those, or just get in touch with us here at the church office. $7 is the cost, plus whatever wherever they decide to stop and eat. And so I'm sure that won't be, Ruth's Chris or somewhere like that. It'll probably be more like Taco Bell. But so that'll be a fun time. They'll look forward to that. So that's about all announcements I think I have this week. I'm going to go over our prayer list here, and I remind everybody, as I do every week, and if you're watching us online, that you can get this announcement and prayer list sheet sent directly to you. If you go to macedoniabaptist.church, you can fill out the info section on there and have with your phone number, your email address, and you can get this sent to the device of your choice. You can also send us updates or prayer requests on our website. If you go to macedoniabaptist.church, you can tell us, hey, be praying for this, or you can message us through Facebook Live or through our Facebook church page where you're watching us here tonight if you're online. Either way, we'd be glad to get those updates. All right, a few prayer needs that are on here. I'm just going to mention them so you'll know that they're there. And then we'll go back over them later. And one, like I said, we pay the backpack ministry, and there'll be a list in the bulletin as well as for that. We pray for our community, our outreach, our nation, our deacons, and our family ministry there. We've been praying for Keith Perkle, who's having some trouble with his COPD and breathing. Also, sympathy for the family of Anthony Harris, who passed away. He's a friend of mine, and some folks that used to run with, and so just pray for Anthony and his family. He had cancer, and he's recently passed. Pray for Travis Houston, Missy Bracken's brother. He may have a blood clot in his leg that they're checking. We're praying for that. We have a praise. Winston Bible came forward this past Sunday and said he has accepted the Lord as his Savior, and so he wants to be baptized, and we are planning to do that, not this coming Sunday, but next, so the 18th. So pray for Winston and his family. I know they're rejoicing that time, and we rejoice as well. Guy Gurley is trying to quit tobacco, and we're praying for him. Wanda Scroggs had double bypass, and is praying for her. Liana Webb is fighting cancer. Ruthie Crockett has COVID and is in the hospital in Erlanger. We're praying for her. Pat Elliott recuperating from hip, and she's home, right? She's home. Okay, doing well. Okay, good. That's good to hear. John Paris, Amanda Lorick's brother, he is at home. He is out of the hospital finally, He's not at his home, he's at his brother's home, but he's out of the hospital and in a house. And so that is, amazing progress that he's made, but he's still in rehab and healing up, so continue to pray for him. Jack Carlick has had some strokes. He's in rehab. We've been praying for Missy and her brother as they work through their family relationships. Phyllis Corbin, we continue to pray for Miss Phyllis as she's dealing with some heart and lung issues. Praying for Cora Rowe, who's dealing with infection. Karen Mosier has lung cancer, taking chemo. Marie Williams is in hospice care. Nick Richards, recovering from a car accident. Now he's in rehab. And Kim Odom, praying for her mental and physical health. And that's we also have many on the spiritual needs. And Judy Atkinson, our secretary here, has an unspoken request she'd like to pass along. And many others with spiritual needs, health needs, cancer needs, ministry needs. We got all kinds of needs. Listen, the Lord knows what each and every one needs. And again, like I said, we like to keep these out, keep everybody updated. So if you know of any, you're welcome. You are more than welcome. Call the church office, or email the church, or message us through our Facebook page, or just tell one of our members and say, hey, put this on y'all's prayer list, and we will be honored to do that and keep them lifted up in prayer. All right. Well, let's take our Bibles and turn to the book of Joshua, chapter 6. And we're going to deal with what for some is a very difficult, I don't want to say passage, just a whole difficult situation, because we are going to deal with the destruction of Jericho. We're going to talk about that tonight. And I couldn't come up, I'm not creative enough to come up with a real good title, So the title for this is Why Jericho? Why did Jericho have to be destroyed? Now, this still goes on. This is a sore spot even today in the Middle East. We know there's all kinds of trouble in the Middle East even today. You turn on the news, and the Arabs and the Israelis are just at it all the time. The Palestinians are shooting rockets at the Israelis, and the Israelis fly their planes and drop bombs back on the Palestinians, and the Israelis say, this is our place, this was our land, we were forcibly removed from it, and the Palestinians say, no, you took it from our people, and back and forth, and they say, you can even find it in your Bible. You go to the book of Joshua, and y'all are just a bunch of invaders. It is still a sore spot, even over 3,000 years later. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that something? Isn't that amazing? These old wounds die hard. And so many people today are uncomfortable with the book of Joshua and with this story of Joshua fighting the battle of Jericho and the complete and absolute and abject destruction of Jericho and all of its inhabitants. But I have to caution us against falling into the trap of looking at ancient events with modern eyes. We just can't do it. People in the ancient world did not look at the things, they didn't look at life, and they didn't look at the world the same way that we do today. And so to look at them and to judge them by our standards of today is just, it's not I don't want to say unfair, it's just unwrong, it's bad history. But we're going to see if we can deal with this here tonight in a respectful way. And it is a sad fact that we're going to see the whole city of Jericho destroyed. Okay. And we ask ourselves, why did Jericho have to be? Why did God command Joshua to destroy these people? Why was God letting the Israelites evict the Canaanites in the first place? A little bit of history, a little bit of background. You remember when God promised that land to Abraham? There was just Abraham. Isaac hadn't been born yet. There had been no Jacob, no Jacob and Esau, no 12 sons yet. There's just Abraham and his small band. There's no way they could inhabit that whole territory. And God even told Abraham, he said, look, your people are going to be slaves in a foreign land for many years because the sin of the Canaanites is not yet accomplished. Basically, he said, they're going to go past the point of no return at some point. And so we know the story then of ultimately the 12 sons of Jacob become the 12 tribes of Israel. They go down to Egypt during a time of famine. They become a large nation while they're there. And then here we are at the end of them, the Exodus period. They've come out of Egypt as this large independent nation, and now they're going back to the land that they were promised by God to begin with. But guess what? Somebody's already living there. There's a Canaanite culture that's been there for a long time. This Canaanite culture was very pagan, very wicked. I could spend a whole night time here talking about some of the stuff that the Canaanites did. Let's just say that each individual Canaanite city had its own gods, okay? Had its own tribal god. This city would worship this god. They had a few that were kind of, they'd consider over all of them, but they had a just collection, this pantheon of gods. And all these different gods had some different ways that they would worship. And some of them were very cruel. There was human sacrifice, child sacrifice. Some of them were very lewd. There was a lot of sexual practices that went on in the Canaanite rituals. I mean, you want to have fertility of the land, you go to the temple and you have sex with the temple prostitute, and that ensures the fertility. You do this in church, you're in the temple, it's okay. And so there was a lot of immorality, a lot of just darkness in the land. And God said, that's enough. And he judged the Canaanites on their wickedness, their rebellion, and their refusal to acknowledge him. Now, lest we think that just happens to the Canaanites, God still judges humanity for our wickedness, our rebellion, and our refusal to honor him. So let's keep that in the back of our minds as we read this here. So why is Jericho going to be destroyed? Well, first of all, I want to say that Jericho is going to be a type of first fruits, a type of a first fruit offering in a way. Let's read verse 17 through 19. It said, the city, this is when they're getting the orders. They've marched around the city all these times. The walls are about to fall down. It says, the city will be under the ban. It and all that is in it belongs to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot and all who live with her in the house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. As for you, only keep yourselves from the things under the ban, lest you covet them and take some of the things under the ban, so you would make the camp of Israel accursed and bring trouble on it. But all the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord, and they will go into the treasury of the Lord. Okay. So, Joshua and the Israelites have crossed the Jordan River. They have come across the river. They have circumcised all the people, and now they're ready to go and begin the conquest. And the first place that they've got to go and attack is Jericho. Jericho, this large, prosperous, ancient city sitting right there, the gateway to the promised land. And so they're going to go, and God's already told them. We talked about that last week. I've given Jericho into your hands. This is a done deal. And the Jerichoites know it. They're frightened. Rahab said as much. Our hearts have melted within us. We know that your God is God of heaven and earth. And so God basically tells Joshua, this is a done deal. I'm giving you the land. Jericho's the first step. And he commands Joshua that Jericho and everything in Jericho is to be under the ban. Now, when you say it's under the ban, when I say I've banned something, we think about putting it aside, putting it away, right? If I ban you from coming in here, you can't come in the church house anymore, right? If this is banned, it's contraband, it's illegal, you can't have it. Well, when we read that in the Bible and you say something's under the ban, it basically means it is consecrated to the Lord. It is not for you. You can't have it. It's banned from you, so to speak. This belongs to God. This is holy. And in a way, some of the commentaries I was reading is Jericho is a type of first fruits offering. In Leviticus chapter 23, you find where it says, the Lord spoke to Moses, starting in verse 9, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land which I'm going to give you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring in the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He will wave the sheaf before the Lord for you to be accepted. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest will wave it. And on the day when you wave the sheaf, you will offer a male lamb 1 year old without defect and a burnt offering to the Lord. Its grain offering shall then be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, An offering by fire to the Lord for a soothing aroma with a libation, a fourth of a hin of wine, until the same day, until you have brought in the offering of your God, you shall eat neither bread, nor roasted grain, nor new growth. It is to be a perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwelling places. Okay, God says, when you come in, you need to give a first fruit offering. In fact, when you read that, before you eat of your produce, you bring an offering to God from that produce. Before you eat of the fruit of your land, God gets the first fruit. I think we tend to give God our leftovers. God wants our first and best. And that's the idea of what the first fruit is. You know, this is the best. This is the first of the harvest. I bring this to God. This is His. And I trust Him enough for me to live on the leftovers, what He's going to leave me. We do it backwards in our day and time. We keep what we think we need. We give God whatever's left. But we can get into that later. So what Jericho is, God has given Israel Canaan. But He says, Jericho is mine. That's my first fruit. Because you see, in the ancient world, when you went to war with somebody, and this is another thing that, you know, we miss out on because we think this is wrong now. We don't do this. If we go to war with another nation, we may conquer their land and conquer this, but what do as Americans? We rebuild them, don't we? I mean, we won World War II and we rebuilt Europe and Japan stronger than they were before. We pour our money and our resources back. It didn't work that way in the ancient world. If I came to your country and I conquered your country, I took everything in your country, spoils of war. If I found silver and gold, guess what? It's mine. If I find young women, guess what? They're mine. You know, that was considered what was plunder, was considered part of this, you know, ancient warfare. If I raised an army, I didn't pay soldiers. I raised an army. I said, we're going to war with these folks over here, and you get to keep part of whatever you can find. You know, almost sounds like piracy, doesn't it? But that's kind of the way that ancient warfare worked. So it was accepted that when you took a city, everything's in it belonged to you. Spoils of war, all the silver, all the gold, all the animals, all the people. You do whatever you want with them, and generally you killed the strong men. You kept the women, took them into your harem, sold the young people as slaves, kept the silver and the gold, and wiped them out. That's how ancient warfare worked. Okay? So when God tells Joshua to wipe out Jericho, He's not telling him to do something that isn't already always happening in ancient warfare. The difference is, He says, you don't get to keep anything from Jericho for you. Because I'm going to give you the whole land of Canaan. Keep your hands off Jericho. That, it says there, is under the ban. It is dedicated. It is holy to the Lord. So all the silver and gold, all the fine things that you find, they're going to come into the God's treasury. They're going to come into the tabernacle, into the temple. You're going to have the rest of the land, but this is for you. God gifted Canaan to Israel, and Jericho was to be the first fruits. And first fruits are brought in before the cost is counted. And I already touched on this. And the question that we ask ourselves is, do we trust God enough to bring Him our first fruits today? You know, we do it backwards. God's supposed to get the first and the best. He even says it. Of animals, the first thing that opens the womb is mine. You know, so the first lamb, the first calf, the first child that is born to any woman belongs to God. It was brought in as a sacrifice. And if you were a child, let's say Jesus was Mary's first child, they had to go to the temple and present Him and bring a sacrifice in His place, because that first one belongs to God. Always, that's part of it. The first one belongs to God, but we don't do that, do we? We don't bring the first of what we have and say, here, God, here's my first, here's my best. We bring Him what's left over. If I've got enough money at the end of the month, I'll throw a few coins in the offering plate. If I've got a little bit of time, I'll show up at church on Sunday and say I've done my duty. And we don't give Him the best of our time. We don't give Him the best of our treasure. We don't give Him the best of our efforts. We don't give Him our first fruits. And do we trust Him enough to do that? It's a symbol of trust. It's thinking, I need to save this back for me. I need to have this for me. We kind of need to recapture this first fruits thing, I think, in our day and time. Give to God first and watch Him take care of all the rest. as a pastor, you get questions a lot of times. One of the questions I'll get is always about tithing. Are we supposed to tithe? Should we tithe? How much should we tithe? What should I tithe on? I'm like, look, it's not in the New Testament that you're commanded to tithe. A tithe is a tenth. That was, commanded with the Israelites, of course, and no, it's not necessarily commanded in the New Testament and all this. But most of the time I find when people ask that question, they're trying to get out of paying some sort of tithe. And then the next question comes, well, do I pay on my gross or my net? Is it what I bring home or what I get paid on? And my answer to all that is just this. Look, I'm not going to tell you. You be convinced in your own heart about it. God will speak to you about that. But I've never been able to outgive God. When I give him my first and best, even when times are hard, I've never missed a meal yet. He's always kept a roof over my head. And I find that we can always trust God. So Jericho is first fruits. It's a prosperous city. There's going to be a lot of riches there and a lot of temptations to the Israelites to want to keep that for themselves. And God says, don't do it. Give that to me and trust me for the rest. So it's a first fruit offering. It's also a dramatic demonstration of Yahweh's power. And I say Yahweh's power. I don't want to just say God's power, like we'll say a lot of times, because the Canaanites, they worship their gods too. This is not a demonstration of a God's power. This is a demonstration of the God's power. Yahweh, Israel's covenant God, that he is the true God. Look at verse 20. The people shouted. The priest blew the trumpets. It came about when the people heard the sound of the trumpet that the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight ahead, and they took the city. Now, we talked last week about this unusual strategy that God gave Joshua. Here Jericho is, a large, well-defended, strong city, a lot of people in it, and they hold up behind their strong walls, and God didn't tell Joshua to build a siege engine. God didn't tell Joshua to begin to tunnel under the walls to undermine them. God didn't tell Joshua to build towers to scale the walls. All these things you would have done in ancient siege warfare. He said, y'all remember, right? Surround the building. Once a day for 7 days. Well, for 6 days. And then 7 times on the 7th day. Just walk around. Don't say a word. Priest blowing the trumpets, that's all. That kind of sounds crazy. But on that 7th day, they marched around, priest blowing the trumpet, everybody being quiet until the moment comes when Joshua said, now yell. And when the people shouted, the walls just... Now, this is not something you can explain away with science and physics. The people marching around the walls did not weaken the ground enough to cause the things to fall down, And when they made a big shout, I don't care how many Israelites there were shouting, they can't shout loud enough to make all the walls of this strong city fall down flat. This was an absolute supernatural miracle, a work of God that showed his power, his sovereignty, and the fact that if you're in Jericho, you may think you're safe behind your walls, but when God decides it's time for judgment, God's power is going to overrule every wall that you build to try to keep him out. And this is a display of his awesome power. Jericho's walls could not withstand the will of God. God had determined Jericho was going to fall. God had judged the land of Canaan for their sin, their rebellion, their perversion. And God had said, it's going to fall. I've had enough. I am using Israel as my instrument of judgment against these people. And once my judgment has started, it will be accomplished. And so, when the walls of Jericho fell down, it's just, like I said, a demonstration that God's will is going to be done. He has the power to do what he says he will do. Also, Israel at that point can't claim victory. If you're an Israelite, you can't go around saying, yeah, we took Jericho, we did this, we did that. All you can say is, we marched around the city and then one day yelled and the walls fell down. How'd that happen? had to be God. No other way but the work of God. And so God's just demonstrating his power, his authority over everything when he causes Jericho's walls to fall in. And I think, how are we letting God demonstrate his power in our lives? I mean, if the Israelites had said, say they'd had a mutiny that second day against Joshua and said, this is stupid. Nobody wins a war this way, Joshua. We're going to do things right. And they got rid of him and started trying to fight. You think Israel would have succeeded? No. Because God would not be in it with them at that point. This is all about God and not about Israel. And so Israel had to be patient, had to wait on God's timing, and had to watch God's power at work. And how are we patiently waiting to see God work in our life? I have a problem with this, okay? Because I want things to happen now, right now, when I want them to happen. And I have found over the years that God works, but he works in his time. And God's power is displayed, but it's displayed when it's perfectly ready. Not when I'm ready. And I mess up God's plan a lot of times by trying to run ahead. Then I'm like Moses, striking the rock and, saying things and stealing the glory from God at that point. Well, God backs off at that point. You want to handle it in your power? You go right ahead and see what happens. But in this case right here, the Israelites were faithful. The Israelites walked around and they let God demonstrate his power, not just to them, but to all of the land of Canaan. Because word of this is going to get around. They had already had word, right? We read that when they first met Rahab. She said, we heard what happened, how God parted the Red Sea for you all when you left Egypt. That was 40 years before. But the word was still around about that. We heard how y'all defeated the other kings, Sihon and Og, on the other side of the river over there. So word was getting around. And word of this victory is going to get around too. So if you're in the next city in line, you're going to have to think, whoa, now they're coming for us. And Israel's God, Yahweh, is proving himself to be a powerful God and a God who can defeat our local gods. Jericho's God, who would make Jericho prosperous, couldn't defeat Israel's God. That's the Canaanite mindset when God has demonstrated his power. So, how are we going to patiently wait and let God demonstrate his power? Oh, it's hard. I can't do it most of the time, y'all. I need help with that. But the last, not least thing we'll touch on here, Jericho was a first fruit offering. It's a demonstration of God's power, Yahweh's power, and it is also a warning. Look at verse 21. It says they utterly destroyed everything in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox, sheep, and donkey with the edge of the sword. Now this is the part that's tough. Because, there's no sugarcoating it. Israel went into Jericho and killed every living thing. I'm talking about every soldier, every soldier's wife, every old man and every woman, every infant in the cradle. They killed every single one. That's harsh to modern ears. If we saw that today in our time, we would say, war crimes, we got to set up a tribunal. This is, we want to put rules to war and say you can only kill these people, only kill soldiers, you can't kill civilians and all. That wasn't the case in ancient warfare. What God commanded Israel to do was not unusual. Most of the time, cities were completely razed, ransacked, and the whole population either carried off or destroyed. So that's just what's happening. And this picture of utter destruction is just a reminder of how it corresponds to God's utter rejection of the Canaanite culture. God says, I have utterly rejected them. So, Israel, you destroy them. Also, I'm giving you this land. And as harsh as this sounds, and as cold as it sounds, any of those pagans that you leave in that land are going to become a stumbling block to you. Because that sweet little girl, that sweet little pagan girl, well, when your good little Israelite boy decides he likes her, she is going to lead him into her worship. That one that you don't get rid of, that's the seed of the future sin. That's leaving that seed of pagan perversion of worship that I am cleansing this land from. And so Israel was not supposed to assimilate any of this Canaanite culture into them. And that's what would happen if they left some of it around. And it was a warning. And Israel did not get the warning. They did not heed the warning. You know, they saw how God completely judged Canaan, how God completely rejected them, completely wiped them out. They were the instruments of that happening, and yet they went down the exact same path many years later. Fell into idolatry, fell into paganism, fell into rebellion and rejection of God. And what did God do? Allowed the same thing to happen to them that he's allowing to happen to the Canaanites. They would be the ones driven out of Canaan. They would be carried off to Babylon. They would be scattered abroad because of their rebellion. It's a warning. We look at Jericho and we understand even today, I mean, other Canaanites cities could look and know that judgment was near. If God could do this to Jericho, large, prosperous, and secure, he can do this to any of us. And he has the power and the means to do it. So he must be serious about this thing. And you know, today it's a warning to us. We don't like to talk about it, and we don't like to preach about it anymore. We don't like to say it, but guess what? God is still serious about sin and judgment. God's judgment is still on this world and us in it because of sin. And he is not going to tolerate it. And sin will be completely eradicated at the end of the age. Here's the thing. We are the carriers of sin. We can't assimilate with God. You won't be around sin. Something's got to be done. Now, God has made provision for us in his mercy. He made provision for Rahab at Jericho because she called for mercy on Israel's God. She recognized he was God of heaven and earth. And she said, just let me be one of y'all. I want to be under your God. So in grace, she was saved. Now we are saved in grace through Jesus Christ. We are under judgment for our sin, but in Christ, his blood shed for us serves as a type of sacrifice and Passover for us. So that God then looks at us and says, okay, you are under the ban, you are under sin, you are under judgment, but my son took that judgment for you. Therefore, you can come and be part of my community. See, the other Canaanite could look and like Rahab and say, Israel's God is a true God. We'll come and worship that. And, you know, God is never about destruction. He's always about reconciliation. We will see where some other people get reconciled in out of that Canaanite culture. But we're reconciled through Christ. But we still have to understand God is serious about sin and judgment. He's not going to let it stand. And his judgment is utter, complete, and total. There won't be any exceptions. And it's an awful thing to think about. Just like this destruction of Jericho is a horrible thing to think about, it's even more awful to me to think about the eternal destiny of those who die apart from Jesus Christ. So it's up to us to tell the story of that judgment and also the story of that grace that keeps us from having to fall under that judgment. So we ask ourselves then, are we heeding the warning? Are we looking at that instead, or are we assimilating? Are we letting the world, little pieces of the world keep coming into our heart, into our lives, into our homes, and leading us away from God, leading our kids away from God, leading our grandkids away. And, just little things here and there, the things that we say, oh, that's not too bad. Maybe we won't destroy that, or we won't get rid of that, or we won't reject that. And it's those little seeds. They grow into huge, big, thorny bushes later on. So we need to take a warning from this. And like I said, and it seems awfully harsh to us, but God is serious about sin and judgment. It's kind of a heavy topic here for tonight. But, you know what? The good thing is there's grace and there's mercy. We're going to touch on that next time. Get to lay the judgment this time. Then we're going to talk about the grace that can come in spite of that next time when we pick back up here. That's as far as we'll go tonight. I want to thank everybody for joining us here tonight. And if you're joining us online, we encourage you to join us here in person if you can. Every Wednesday night at 6:30. Join us at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning for Sunday school, 10 o'clock in the morning for our regular time of worship. We hope to see you then. Hope everyone has a good week. If you can't join us in person this Sunday morning, you can join us right here on Facebook Live or on YouTube Live, and we hope to see you then and there. Until then, everybody have a good night. God bless you, and have a wonderful week.